Everyone, today I am reading lesson number 6, Rosa Parks, the Mother of the Civil Rights Movement. When I'm reading our story today, there are going to be 3 vocab words we're focusing on. The first vocab word is the word boycott. Boycott is an action in which a group of people join together and refuse to do business with a company or organization as a way of expressing their disapproval. So the community planned to stage a boycott of the store that refused to recycle. The second vocab word we're focusing on today is injustice. Injustice means a lack of fairness. So if something is unjust, there's a lack of fairness. And the last vocab word we're focusing on is segregation. That is the practice of keeping groups of people separate or apart due to reasons such as skin color or race. So again, our 3 vocab words are boycott, injustice, and segregation. When you hear those words when I'm reading, if you tap your head, that tells Miss Fogarty that you're catching the words and you're listening for them while I read. Today, I want you to listen carefully to find out the important role that the bus played in Rosa Parks' decision to fight for a cause. This first picture we see is a picture of Rosa Parks, and behind her there is a white gentleman. Rosa Louise Parks was born a long time ago, in 1913, in Tuska, Alabama. Her family name was McCauley. Rosa and her family were African American. Rosa grew up on a small farm with her brother, mother, and grandparents. Rosa was a happy child. She loved her family. However, Rosa lived at a time in a place where African Americans faced discrimination. This was especially true in the South, where Rosa lived, because in that part of the United States, there was something going on known as segregation. That is a practice of keeping groups of people separate, in this case based on skin color. Because of segregation, African Americans and white people did not go to the same schools, eat at the same restaurants, or go to the same movie theaters. When traveling by bus, African Americans were expected to sit in certain seats. It was as if African Americans and white people lived in different worlds. This is a picture of an example of segregation in the South. When Rosa Parks was a little girl, she attended a school that was just for African American children. It was an old, one-room schoolhouse and only held classes for 5 months out of the whole 12-month year. Far too often, there weren't enough desks or school supplies for their students. Rosa noticed that buses took white children to new schools nearby where she lived. When Rosa was 11 years old, she was sent to Montgomery, Alabama to continue her studies. But when she was 16, Rosa had to leave school to care for her grandmother and her mother, who both became ill. To help support her family, Rosa worked in a shirt factory. So one thing you can notice in this picture, although yes, they're black and white, the picture on the left-hand side is of an African-American school. There's not enough desks. There's not enough school supplies for the children. So they had to use whatever they could find for seats or for paper or for pencils. Whereas the white children on the right-hand side, very privileged. They had everything they needed. Their desks are brand new. Their school buildings are brand new. They had chalkboards. They had all of that. So the difference is right away you can see is the African Americans didn't have the same things, the same privileges as the white folks. When Rosa was 19, she married Raymond Parks. Raymond was a barber, so meaning he cut hair. He was also actively involved in the Montgomery chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. This organization wanted to make life in the United States fairer and safer for African Americans and end segregation in the South. Rosa also became involved and served as the Montgomery chapter secretary. In addition, she returned to high school to earn her high school diploma. Then came the day in Rosa's life when she stood up for what was right. Actually, Rosa did not stand up, and that's the reason we remember and honor Rosa Parks to this day. This is a picture of Rosa Parks boarding or getting on a bus. The evening of December 1st, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama was cold. The streets were full of people shopping or making their way home from work. By this time, Rosa had a job as a seamstress at a local department store. Her day had just ended, and she had rushed to catch the city bus that would now take her home. As Rosa boarded the bus, she could see the bus was already quite full. Because the section at the back of the bus where African Americans usually sat was full, Rosa found a seat in the middle of the bus. So in this picture, Rosa is on the left-hand side, right where my mouse is. She's sitting alone. So she's in the middle. Notice all of the colored folks are off in the back of the bus. But the back of the bus was full, so she said, oh, here's an empty seat. I'm going to sit here. The seat Rosa found was just behind the seats reserved for white people. Before long, all the seats on the bus were full, and several white people were left standing. Back then, the bus driver had the power or authority to move people, and African Americans were the first ones that had to move. The bus driver noticed that the people were standing and ordered several African American people on the bus to stand and give their seat to white people. All of them did as asked, except for Rosa. When the bus driver told Rosa that if she did not stand up, he would call the police to come and arrest her, she quietly responded, "You may do that." When he asked her one more time to stand up, Rosa responded by saying, "I don't think I should have to stand up." I want you guys to be thinking, why do you think she refused to stand up? She's being threatened to be sent to jail. Why didn't she just get up? The bus driver made the call, and before long, the police officer arrived. The officer wanted to know why she would not give up her seat. Rosa responded by asking the officer a question. "Why are you always pushing us around?" she asked. Rosa was arrested and taken to the police headquarters. Later that night, she was released on bail. So bail is money someone pays when he or she is arrested so they can stay out of jail until their time in court comes. So she paid or someone paid for her so she didn't have to sit in jail until her court case. The law at that time in Alabama gave bus drivers the right to assign seats or to give people a place, and also gave them the right to carry guns. As a result, many African American people felt threatened and they were frightened to challenge this practice. But Rosa had done so. So bus drivers could say, "Hey, get up, a white person's going to sit down." And they could carry guns, and African Americans knew this. So they really didn't fight back. They just got up and moved because they were a little bit afraid that, maybe the police officer would pull out his gun or the bus driver would pull out their gun. But Rosa wasn't afraid. Rosa later said that she had not planned to protest, but in that moment, her desire for civil rights and her sense of injustice or unfairness drove her to make that decision. "When I made that decision," Rosa said, "I knew I had the strength of my ancestors with me." This was the moment that changed history. Rosa had refused to move, and now others would show their support for her. It was decided that the hundreds of African Americans who rode the city bus to work would now walk instead. This kind of action is called a boycott. A boycott is when a group of people, they join together and refuse to buy things at a business or to ride a city bus. In Montgomery, they all refused to ride the city buses. That was showing support for Rosa. The NAACP began to organize what now became known as the Montgomery Bus Boycott. African Americans women's groups began to organize too. So they all said, "You know what you did to Rosa is not right. We're going to not ride your buses. We're not giving you money. We don't want to support an organization or a bus that was unkind to fellow members." This is a picture of Rosa, and in the background, Martin Luther King Jr. A young man named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led the boycott. Dr. King said, "We will walk until justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." Beginning on December 5th, 1955, people refused to ride the city buses in Montgomery. The boycott lasted for 382 days, a little over a year. Without passengers to ride the buses couldn't afford to run. At that time in Montgomery, more than 7 out of every 10 riders on a bus were African American. Businesses were disrupted. So if something's disrupted, it means that certain things are prevented from happening due to confusion or turmoil. Many white people supported the boycott too. So African Americans boycotted. They didn't ride the bus. They didn't give the bus their money because they didn't like how unfair they were being treated. But some white people supported this as well and said, "You know what? You're right. That's not fair. Skin color doesn't matter. So we're not going to ride the bus either." And because of that, the buses had to shut down because they didn't have enough money to run. On November 13, 1956, the United States Supreme Court decided that Montgomery's segregated bus seating was unconstitutional. It meant that it's against the law. A court order was served on December 20th, 1956, and the boycott ended the next day. After that, buses were integrated, and African Americans could now sit wherever they wanted. That boycott became a powerful way for people to peacefully protest. So peacefully means non-violently. There were no guns, there were no fighting, there was no war. Just by refusing to ride the bus and doing that peacefully without causing a big commotion physically made a big change, and people were noticing that. They didn't have to fight with their fists. They could do it in a way that was respectful. Rosa Parks' actions helped to start the civil rights movement. In fact, Rosa became known as the mother of the civil rights movement. Rosa remained an active member of the NAACP and other civil rights groups. She showed her support for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by participating in civil rights marches. Rosa became a member of the staff of a Michigan congressman. She worked in his office for 23 years, from 1965 until she retired in 1988. Rosa also founded an institution to help young people complete their education. In her lifetime, Rosa received several awards for her courage and her work. In 1979, the NAACP awarded Rosa its Stigner Medal. Rosa received 2 of the United States government's most important civilian honors, or honors given to people who aren't serving in our military. Rosa received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1996 and the Congressional Medal of Honor in 1999. Rosa once said, "I'd see the bus pass every day, but to me, that was a way of life. We had no choice but to accept what we were accustomed to. The bus was among the first ways I realized that there was a world for the black and a world for white." Incredibly, by her own actions, Rosa Parks changed the world. Rosa became a symbol of power and nonviolence. Her quiet, courageous act changed America and changed the course of history forever.